Hello investors, welcome to Alphawealth Avenues. We believe in the mantra, invest wisely and live wealthy. We are on a mission to empower your investing journey by providing cutting edge research and timely guidance. आज हम बात करेंगे प्रेसिडेंट ट्रंप की नई टैरिफ पॉलिसी के बारे में, जहां पे टैरिफ मिल रही है लेकिन सबको इंसाफ नहीं मिल रहा है. So let us look at where we are. आज हम बात करेंगे रिकैप ऑफ द लास्ट 3 वीक्स कि हमने क्या क्या सुना, हमें क्या क्या समझा. What can be the likely intentions of the US President Trump behind these random looking decisions, behind some melodrama that is happening on a daily basis, sometimes hourly basis. और हम ये भी डिस्कस करेंगे कि ऑब्वियसली इंडिया पे इम्पैक्ट क्या है. सो 2 अप्रैल को प्रेसिडेंट ट्रंप ने ड्रामेटिकली एक बड़ा बोर्ड निकाला जहाँ पे काफ़ी सारे कंट्रीज़ के नाम थे और उनको जो नए टैरिफ लगेंगे, ट्रेड टैरिफ लगेंगे, वो अनाउंस किए. दिस वाज एक्सपेक्टेड बिकॉज अपनी जो प्रेसिडेंशियल कैंपेन थी एज वेल एज जब से वो फॉर्मली प्रेसिडेंट बने जैन 25 में, तब से उन्होंने बहुत स्पेसिफिकली इस चीज़ों की बात की थी. बट द सरप्राइज वॉज द हाई लेवल ऑफ टैरिफ्स एंड द ब्रेड्थ ऑफ कंट्रीज विच वर कवर्ड शॉक द वर्ल्ड. जैसे एक स्वीपिंग पॉलिसी चेंज होता है. दिस विल ऑब्वियसली हैव सिग्निफिकेंट implications for the global economy and the stock markets. Within a few days, we came to know that the main reason for this disruption was to target the Chinese imports that are coming to the US, not only through the domain of China, but through the neighboring countries, which are being used by China as a proxy play. Let's see now if we can categorize any analysis into good and bad news. So good news ये है कि on the 9th of April, President Trump has announced that there's a 90-day pause on the high tariffs to most countries except China. तो एक breathing space मिल गया सबको. The bad news is exactly that since they directly targeted China, since then एक अच्छा बॉक्सिंग मैच चल रहा है रेसिप्रोकल हायर टैरिफ्स का. और कुछ दिन पहले हमने 245% टैरिफ का जिक्र सुना फ्रॉम द यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स टू चाइना, विच इज सिंपली रिडिकुलस एंड अनटेनेबल. अभी देखते हैं कि व्हाट हैज एक्चुअली ड्रिवन द यूएस प्रेसिडेंट टू डू दिस. सो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, यूएस इज सफरिंग फ्रॉम अ वेरी हाई ट्रेड डेफिसिट विच इज 1.8 ट्रिलियन एंड इट इज 6.5% ऑफ द जीडीपी. वर्ल्ड वॉर 2 के बाद यूएस हैज बीन सपोर्टिंग ओपन मार्केट पॉलिसीज एंड उसके लिए उन्होंने टैरिफ्स लो किए. द मेन ऑब्जेक्टिव वॉज दैट यूएस कंपनीज, द मेन प्रोड्यूसर्स, वुड गेट एक्सेस टू द ग्लोबल कंज्यूमर्स. इसकी वजह से काफ़ी सारे एग्रीमेंट्स हुए फॉर अ ग्लोबलाइजेशन एंड फ्री ट्रेड, GATT, WTO, NAFTA. बट हुआ कुछ उल्टा इन टर्म्स ऑफ व्हाट चाइना डिड. चाइना ने मार्केट को ओपन किया और अपने जो मेन इंडस्ट्रीज थे जैसे स्टील, सोलर, शिप बिल्डिंग, इनको इतने मैसिव सब्सिडीज दिए डोमेस्टिकली कि दे कुड प्रोड्यूस ऑन सच अ मैसिव स्केल एंड एट सच अ लो कॉस्ट कि the domestic industries in most of the countries could come nowhere near the scale or the cost both. That is why US wants to stop this dumping and wants to renegotiate trade relations on a bilateral basis. So open markets को कहीं पे रोक लगाना चाहते हैं. दूसरा important factor ये है is US had a 25% GDP in the 1950s of manufacturing. That share has come only to 10% last year, and hence the US president wants to revive this manufacturing in key sectors like semiconductors, automobiles and pharmaceuticals. So this is a big policy shift. अभी देखते हैं कि इंडिया और यूएस के बीच में क्या डायनामिक्स है. So last year we had a trade surplus of 36 billion because we are exporting much more than what we are importing from the US. Here we have mentioned the main categories of goods that we export. As far as our dependency on these exports for our GDP is concerned, it is only 2%. But as a share of our total exports, it is significant, which is 17%. So if we have to facilitate what the US president wants, that is to reduce the US trade deficit, there can be a mutual understanding on India importing more items which can help it and also increase the US exports. So one example can be oil. 2022 में US से oil import 9% था and it was from rest of the countries. But last year it was only 3% and then Russia had a big share. If we were to go back even to the initial 9-10% which was there 3 years back, तो अपना जो ट्रेड डेफिसिट है वो सीधा 25-30% से कम हो जाएगा एंड यूएस विल बी सेटिस्फाइड। वैसे ही अगर ऐसे सब आइटम्स का वी मेक अ लिस्ट एंड देयर इज अ बायलैटरल ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट अबाउट हाउ टू डू इट, देन it will surely be beneficial for both countries. The good part is, unlike some of the peers like the European Union or China, we have not criticized the Trump policy. In fact, we have had a conciliatory approach. Utna hi nahi, we have proved through action by reducing duties on some of the US imported goods like motorcycles, bourbon, whiskey, even before 2nd of April, to show an olive branch to the new policy. The Indian sectors which are likely to get impacted, which are export heavy to US, are drugs and pharma, because 40% of the generic medicines sold in the US are manufactured in India. If US were to produce them on their home ground, then it would be almost 6 times the cost. And आज जब इस low cost consumption चालू है, उस टाइम पे भी healthcare is the highest percentage cost in a US citizen's expenditure, is also 18%, that is 1/6 of the US GDP. So while it sounds counterintuitive, the pharma industry is prepared for higher tariffs in the short term compared to where we are now. Similarly, IT services and BPO exports, where India is in a leadership position across the globe, US is a big importer. While we have not heard any big tariffs over there so far, as soon as the demand in various sectors come down due to the tariffs, there is going to be indecisiveness about the new contracts, which leads to uncertainty in projecting revenue. The automotive industry, where we again have auto component exports, have been slapped with 25% duty on imports, and this is going to have some impact on our exports. अभी देखते हैं what are the main threats and opportunities across the globe scenario, and इसमें इंडिया कहाँ पे. So as the tariffs will increase and US imports will become dearer, there is going to be a slowdown of the demand, which will affect the export oriented sectors of various countries, and उससे margin affect होगा because growth impact हो जाएगी. The countries might need to share a part of the higher tariff burden unless they are in a position to pass on the entire increase to the US consumer. So उनका वापस P&L थोड़ा hit हो सकता है. For countries with a manufacturing surplus, India would be one of the largest market other than US to target if the US exports go down. So this is a kind of opportunity, as well as we need to be guarding against dumping of cheap products from some of the neighboring countries. Opportunity क्या है? India, as we said, has already played smartly, and we should be a front runner in the trying to get a bilateral trade agreement. This can lead to opportunities for India to increasing market share of exports of products, where some of the other countries like China, Vietnam have been loaded with tariffs which can be multiples of what they are for Indian goods, and hence our products will become cheaper. When there is a recessionary scenario across the globe, oil prices generally tend to get lower and lower. That's very good for us from a lower inflation, lower trade deficit perspective, because India has to import 80% of our oil requirements. Now let us look at a wider picture of what will be driving the actions. More countries will press the accelerator on Atmanirbhar approach. This word we have been using and hearing for the last decade in India. Low margin products will continue to be manufactured in out of developed countries because there is no possibility of that changing purely due to the economics. China and Europe are going to have a massive stimulus to boost domestic demand, anticipating a reduction in the US export share. Domestically, RBI for India has taken many positive steps to boost domestic consumption by injecting liquidity into the system. All in all, what do we conclude where we are now? US does not want to have an import ban but wants to have a trade balance, which is logical. It's unlikely that a developed country wants or needs to compete with a developing nation for low skilled jobs. That is out of question. India is trying hard to have a bilateral agreement which could be very positive whenever it goes through. Japan and Italy have already taken a lead. Along with the US, it is likely that a free trade agreement with the European Union should happen faster. We have been trying it for some time now, but maybe there wasn't enough motivation. That external motivation is there. Something else can also always happen in such a high pressure scenario, where India and China certainly not have been on great relations in the recent past, but having such a huge trade pressure, having manufacturing capacity which is beyond what is needed as US exports go down, there is likely to be again a better mutual trade understanding between the two Asian giants. Last but not the least, the past decade 80% of global capital flows have been entering the US markets. इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि the other economies have not been good to invest, but that is how a herd mentality has had a complete flock of capital only in one direction. That had to change, and as the US president has decided to puncture the current balloon, there is going to be some flight of capital outside the US. Goes without saying that India, with its high growth rate in the economy, is going to be a beneficiary of that. So this is where we are. Happy to share with you what we see is likely to happen, and will keep you posted. Hope this adds value to your investing knowledge. We'll continue to bring for you curated research content. Do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.